The ticket came in at 7:14 on a Wednesday morning in April, and I remember the timestamp because it was the last normal thing that happened to me that week. Spring break had just ended. I was the only guy on the district IT team who actually liked doing hardware maintenance in the server room, so I always got the pre-semester walkthrough. The building sat on the north side of Denver, off Federal, and the server room was in what used to be a supply closet in the basement next to the boiler. Even in April, it was cold down there. You could see your breath if you stood by the door for more than a minute. I brought coffee and my toolkit, nothing else. That morning was supposed to be dust filters, drive health across the 12 servers we ran for the school, log review, and out by lunch. That was it. That was what I was there to do. Around 10, I ran a routine partition scan on the file server that handled staff shares. I was looking at the report on my laptop when I noticed the numbers didn't add up. The drives were 2 terabytes each in a mirrored array, and the scan was showing something like 340 gigabytes unaccounted for. Not free space, not Slack, something else, a partition sitting off the map. I want to be honest here. My first thought was not what you'd expect. My first thought was that a vendor had left a diagnostic partition on the drives from the factory, or that some previous admin had set aside a scratch space and forgot to document it. That happens all the time. People are lazy. I've done it myself. So I mounted it, read only, out of habit. The label was blank. No name, no volume tag, nothing. Inside, there was one folder, just one, called Archive, lowercase, no punctuation, and inside that, subfolders by date, going back almost 2 years. I opened the most recent one. I'll skip the description. I need you to trust me on that. What I saw were photographs, hundreds of them in that folder alone. The angles were low and off-center in a way that told me right away these were not phone photos, not selfies, not anything a kid had taken of themselves. They had been taken by a device tucked somewhere it shouldn't be, at a height somewhere between a shelf and a bench. Middle school kids, getting changed for gym. I closed the folder. I closed it before my brain fully caught up with what I was looking at. There's a physical reaction the body has before the mind gets there, and mine had it. I stood up from the folding chair I'd been using, and I walked to the far wall of the server room, and I put my forehead against the cinder block, which was cold enough to hurt, and I stayed there for maybe 30 seconds. Then I went back, and I checked the other subfolders. Not to look. I never opened another image. I just needed to know how big this was. Every subfolder was full. 2 years of them. I did rough math on the file counts. Thousands. Not hundreds. Thousands. I want to say something now that I've thought about a lot since. There is a version of me that would have deleted everything on that partition right then. Wipe it, secure erase, write zeros across the whole block, and never say a word to anyone. Not because I wanted to protect anybody, because I wanted it out of the world. I wanted to unsee it. I wanted to be someone who had never known any of this existed. I did not do that, and I want to be clear, it was not because I'm a good person. It was because I have been doing this job for 11 years, and my hands know what to do before I do. I stopped touching the machine. I stepped back. I took one photo of the screen with my phone, one photo showing the File Explorer window and the folder structure and the sizes. I did not open anything further. Then I looked at the account. The partition had been mounted under a user account in our directory service, local admin privileges, created 2 years and 1 month before that morning. The username was something bland, svc_backup2, styled to look like a service account, the kind of thing I might have made myself and forgotten about. The display name field was blank, no email tied to it. The password had been changed twice, both times outside of school hours, both times from an IP inside the building. The logs for the account's creation were there, but the fields that would have told me which machine created it and which admin session authorized it were blanked, not deleted. Blanked. Someone had opened the log entry and overwritten those specific fields with spaces. You can do that if you have console access to the domain controller, which is a very short list of people. I sat there in that cold room next to the boiler, and I ran the list in my head. There were 4 of us with that level of access 2 years ago. One was me. One had retired to Arizona, one was a woman who had moved to a district up in Boulder, and one was still in the building. I want to be careful how I talk about him. I only know what the FBI told me later, which wasn't much, and I don't want to put a name on somebody who was never charged, so I'll just say he was still there. He was in the building that morning, actually. I had passed him in the hallway on my way in. He'd said good morning and asked how my spring break went. I'd said, "Quiet, yours?" And he'd said, "Same," and we'd both kept walking. That was maybe 40 minutes before I opened the partition. I did not confront him. I want to be honest that I thought about it. For about 10 seconds, I thought about walking upstairs and looking him in the face, Then I thought about the fact that if I did, and he understood what I'd found, he would have a run at the server before any police could get there, and everything would be gone. So I did the other thing. I called the principal from my cell phone, not the desk line. She picked up on the third ring. I told her I needed her to come down to the server room right now, and I needed her to call the Denver police before she came down, and I needed her to do both of those things in the next 5 minutes, and not ask me why over the phone. She started to argue. I said please one time, and something in my voice must have carried because she said okay, and hung up. While I waited, I sat on the floor with my back against the rack, where I could see the door. I did not touch the keyboard. I did not touch the mouse. I watched the fans spin. Somewhere above me, the second period bell rang, and I heard the muffled sound of feet moving through hallways, hundreds of them, kids I would not have been able to name if you'd asked me. She came down at 10:41. 2 officers were behind her, uniform, one older, one younger. I stood up and I explained what I had found in the flattest voice I could manage. The older officer asked me twice if I was sure. I said yes. He asked if I had touched anything. I said I had mounted the partition read-only, opened one folder, and taken one photo of the file listing. He asked to see the photo. I showed him. He looked at it for maybe 3 seconds, and then he stopped looking, and he told the younger officer to call it in. They cleared everyone out of the basement. By lunchtime, there were 4 more people in the room, 2 of them in plain clothes. They took the server. The whole rack, actually. They photographed the cabling, unplugged everything, sealed each unit with an evidence tag, and carried them out to a van parked in the loading bay behind the cafeteria. They took my laptop too and my phone, and I got both back 3 weeks later with a note that just said cleared. I gave a statement that afternoon in the principal's office. I gave another one 2 days later downtown, longer, with an FBI agent in the room who didn't say much but wrote everything down. He asked about the 4 admins. He asked about the log fields that had been blanked. He asked if I could think of any reason someone would want the account to look like a service account. I told him what I knew. I did not name anybody. I let him work it out. Here is what I know about how it ended, and it is not much. About 6 weeks later, the agent called me. He was polite. He said they had recovered enough from the system logs and the file metadata to identify a specific workstation inside the building where a large portion of the uploads had come from, and to narrow the account activity to a window that only one person had physical access to. He said the word narrow carefully. He said they had a name. He said the U.S. Attorney's Office had reviewed the case and had decided not to file charges at this time. He used that phrase, at this time. I asked why. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the evidence chain had a gap they couldn't close, and that some of the material had been stored in a way that raised questions about how it had been generated, and without a clean chain, they weren't going to risk a case that a defense attorney could take apart in an afternoon. I asked if the person still worked at the school. He said he couldn't discuss that. I hung up. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a King Soopers for a while, watching people load groceries into their trunks. Then I drove home. The man I had passed in the hallway that morning stopped coming to work about a week after the servers were pulled. Family reasons was what went out in an email to staff. He didn't come back. I don't know where he went. I looked once, a year later, and I couldn't find him online. Either he changed his name or he was never using the one I knew him by. Both are possible. I still work in the district. Different building now, my choice. I do the same job. I run the same kinds of scans. And every time I mount a partition I don't recognize, I feel it in my hands before my head catches up. The same thing from that morning in April. It doesn't go away, it just gets quieter. The thing about running geolocation queries at 3 a.m. is you stop looking at the names. You look at the ticket numbers, you look at the request codes, you sign off, and you move on. That's how it stayed clean for a while, at least for me. I worked nights out of a technical center off Peachtree Industrial, north side of Atlanta, December 2021. The floor was almost empty by then, half the day shift still working remote from the pandemic, and the night crew was down to 4 people spread across 2 floors. Analytics, incident response, 1 guy in NOC. Me and a coffee machine that made a noise like a dying refrigerator. My job wasn't glamorous. I sat under a compliance role, second line audit. Once a quarter, I pulled random samples of B2B data requests and checked that everything the account managers had sold matched what the clients were actually pulling from the API. Boring work. 90% of it was fleet tracking, delivery routes, insurance telematics, the kind of stuff nobody wants to read. Then I got to the Logipath account. I'll call them that because I don't want to name them here. Mid-size logistics broker based out of Charlotte, 3-year contract, decent volume. On paper, they moved refrigerated goods along the I-85 corridor. Their contract with us allowed geolocation pulls on subscriber devices tied to their commercial fleet. Standard stuff. Consent handled on their end when they issued the SIM cards to drivers. The sample I pulled that night was 50 requests from the previous week. I opened the first one and read it twice. Single target lookup. Name attached to the request in the notes field, which drivers usually have. But the phone number wasn't on our commercial pool. It was a regular consumer line, prepaid, activated in Norcross. I told myself the account manager probably signed off on some kind of contractor arrangement. Independent driver, uses his own phone, Lodge iPath, pays for the geo, whatever. I flagged it as a soft note and moved to the next one. The next one was another single target. Different name in the notes, different number, again consumer line, this one out of Marietta. By request number 9, I had stopped opening them one at a time and started dumping the whole batch into a spreadsheet. 50 requests, 50 different names, 48 different numbers, all consumer prepaid or postpaid, none of them on our commercial roster. The names were mostly first and last combos. A few had middle initials. One had a nickname in parentheses, like the person writing the ticket knew the target well enough to note what people called him. I sat with that for a while. The heating vent above my desk was blowing that dry office air that makes your eyes hurt after a few hours, and I remember rubbing my face with both hands and just staring at the screen. Somewhere down the hall, a printer cycled on for no reason, printed nothing, and cycled off again. Little sounds like that get louder when the building is mostly empty. You have to understand something. Nothing in the request looked broken. The API calls were valid, the client's credentials were valid, the billing was going through. On the surface, it was normal traffic. It only looked wrong if you actually read the names. I widened the sample. Instead of 50 from 1 week, I pulled a rolling 6 months. About 19,000 requests. I filtered for repeated targets. That's where it started to feel bad. Around 300 names showed up more than once. About 40 showed up more than 10 times. One name, a woman out of Alpharetta, had been queried 83 times in 6 months. Not on a schedule. Bursts. Nothing for 2 weeks, then 12 pings in a single afternoon. Then quiet again. I sat back in my chair and I could hear the NOC guy laughing at something 2 rooms over, a real full laugh, and it sounded like it was coming from another building. I opened one of the 83 pings out of curiosity. The location it returned was a strip mall on Old Milton Parkway. I pulled it up in a map tab. Nail salon, a Chinese place, a UPS store, a little office suite with a dentist. Normal. The next ping was a Publix a mile away. The one after that was a residential address in a subdivision off Kimball Bridge. There was one cluster I couldn't stop looking at. 3 pings in the same evening, all inside a 200-yard radius. First at 7:14, second at 7:16, third at 7:19. Whoever ordered those pings wanted to know exactly when she walked out of a building and which direction she went. I've done enough of this work to know what that pattern looks like. It looks like someone standing outside. I want to be clear about something. I did not know this woman. I had no idea who she was. But I was sitting in a dark office at 3 in the morning looking at a map of her week, and it hit me that if I wanted to, I could probably tell you what time she picked up her kids, where she got her nails done, which grocery store she used on Tuesdays, and I hadn't asked her. She hadn't agreed to any of it. Some analyst at Logipath had typed her name into a ticket, and our system had handed her over. I closed the map tab. Then I closed it again in another window I hadn't realized was open. My hands were doing that thing where they move slightly ahead of what you're actually deciding to do. I remember walking down to the parking deck when my shift ended. It was maybe 38 degrees out, foggy the way Atlanta gets in December when the pavement is warmer than the air. I sat in my car for a long time before I turned the key. I didn't feel scared. I felt tired in a way that was new to me. I did not report it that morning. I want to be honest about that. I went home, got 2 hours of sleep, drank coffee on the balcony, and convinced myself I needed to be sure before I put my name on anything. Compliance escalations at that level can end careers, mine included if I got it wrong. For the next 3 shifts, I dug into Logipath's account history from the sales side. I don't usually have access to CRM notes, but our systems talk to each other well enough that I could reconstruct most of it. Their original pitch, 4 years back, had been for cold chain monitoring, real logistics. Somewhere around month 8, the account manager on their side rotated. A new contact took over. That's when the request volume started climbing and the request patterns started shifting, not overnight, slow, the way you'd boil the water if you were being careful. The account manager on our side had left the company in 2020. Nobody had really owned the account since. It just kept renewing on autopilot. On the 4th night, I pulled a few of the target names into a browser and did the thing you're not supposed to do. I searched them. Public info only, nothing internal. A few came back with LinkedIn pages, a few with local news mentions. One had filed for a restraining order in Fulton County the previous spring against an ex. Another one, a guy in Duluth, had testified in a civil case involving a company that a quick corporate search tied through two shell entities back to Logipath's parent group. I stopped searching after that. I didn't want any more of it in my head. I wrote the email the next morning before my shift ended. Kept it short. Facts only, no theories. I attached the spreadsheet with names redacted to initials, the request volume graph, and 3 specific ticket IDs as examples. I addressed it to the compliance officer, a woman named Renata who I'd met exactly twice at onboarding. I copied nobody. I hit send at 5:47 a.m. and I sat there watching the sent folder like the email might come back. She replied at 8:02, 2 lines, thanked me, said she was pulling legal in. I didn't hear anything for 11 days. On day 12, I got called into a video meeting with Renata, 2 lawyers I didn't know, and a VP whose name I recognized from all hands emails. They asked me to walk them through how I'd pulled the sample, how I'd built the spreadsheet, whether I'd shown it to anyone. Nobody thanked me in that meeting. It wasn't unfriendly. It was the tone of people who were already thinking about depositions. The lawyers had gone through the contract line by line. Geolocation of private individuals outside the commercial fleet was not a permitted use. The consent framework Logipath had signed off on didn't cover any of the names in my sample. The contract was terminated within the week. Logipath was formally notified. The dataset of everything they'd pulled over 3+ years was preserved on a legal hold in case anyone ever came asking. I don't know if anyone ever did. I never saw a news story. I never got a subpoena. Nobody I searched that night ever reached out, and they wouldn't have, because they had no idea any of it had happened. That's the part I can't shake. Whatever the reason someone at Logipath had for typing those names into those tickets, the people on the other end were just living, picking up groceries, going to work, getting their nails done at a place on Old Milton Parkway. None of them knew a stranger in Charlotte had been watching a blue dot move around a map for months, and none of them will ever know now. I stayed at the company another year. I moved off nights eventually. When I pull audits now, I read the names first. The shop sits about 11 miles south of Livingston, off a county road most people miss unless they're looking for it. My father-in-law built it in 1978 out of 2 shipping containers welded together, insulated, cladded in cedar. When he passed, I kept the license active and did the work part-time, then full-time after 2015. Mostly deer, elk, the occasional bear rug for a rancher out toward Big Timber. A lot of fish. It isn't glamorous, but it pays, and I like the quiet. Ray started coming in October of 2018. That's how he introduced himself, just Ray, no last name, and I never asked. Some guys are like that out here. He drove a mud-brown F25. Oh, that had been rebuilt at least once, and he wore the same canvas jacket every visit. Elbows worn through, buttons replaced with mismatched ones. Late 50s maybe. Beard trimmed short. Eyes that never quite settled on you. The first wolf he brought was a big male, gray with black along the shoulders. He wanted a full mount, standing pose, head slightly turned. He paid cash up front and tipped me another $200 on top of the quote. I thought he was just one of those guys who didn't like paperwork. He came back in December with another one, then in February, then April, every 2 months more or less. Always a wolf, always cash, always the same tip. Over 2 years, he brought me 8 of them. I want to be clear about something. In Montana, wolf hunting is legal. You need a license and a tag, and there are quotas that shift year to year. I never asked Ray for his paperwork. That's not really my job. If someone brings me an animal and tells me they took it legal, I take them at their word and I write it down in my log. That's how everyone does it mostly. The licenses get checked when the animal is registered with the state before it ever gets to me. So I wasn't thinking about quotas, I was thinking about the work. Wolves are hard. The fur mat's different than dog fur. The skin is thicker in places, and the face is a nightmare because everyone has a picture in their head of what a wolf looks like, and they'll notice if you get the eyes wrong. By the 6th one, I was actually getting good at it. The thing that started me thinking was a conversation with a game warden in October of 2020. His name was Curtis, and he'd stopped by to drop off a bear tag stub for a client of mine who'd been too lazy to bring it himself. We were standing in the front of the shop drinking coffee out of paper cups, and he saw one of Ray's wolves on the workbench, mostly finished, waiting for the eyes to set. "Damn," Curtis said. "That's a nice one. Whose?" I told him it was a repeat customer, guy named Ray. Curtis looked at the wolf for a long second. Then he asked me, real casual, how many I'd done that year. "This is the 4th, I said. He nodded. He didn't say anything else about it. He finished his coffee, said thanks, and drove off in his green truck. That night, I looked it up on the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks website. In our region, the quota for the whole season was 4 wolves. 4 total for every hunter combined, and it wasn't like the number had been hit and reset. The season had barely started. Ray had brought me 4 that year alone, and another 4 the year before. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open and a beer I hadn't touched, and I ran the math over and over, hoping I was reading the page wrong. I wasn't. Even accounting for the tribal allocations and the different management zones, there was no version of the numbers that let one man legally take 8 wolves in 24 months in this part of the state. I told my wife about it. She was in the doorway drying her hands on a dish towel. She said, "So he's poaching?" I said, "Probably." She said, "So call somebody." I said I would. I meant it too. But the truth is, I didn't call for another 5 days. I kept thinking about the cash and about the fact that Ray had never once done anything that felt off in the shop itself. He was polite. He didn't linger. He never asked me weird questions. I kept trying to make it fit some other shape. The next drop-off was scheduled for the last Friday of October. He'd called 2 weeks earlier from a number that came up as an out-of-service landline when I tried to ring it back. He said he'd have another one for me. Big female this time. He said it like a man ordering a sandwich. He showed up right at 9 in the morning, right when he always did. Backed the F250 up to the roll door. I helped him unload. The carcass was in a canvas tarp tied at both ends with baling twine. Frozen solid, or close to it. I thanked him, and he handed me an envelope of cash and said he'd be back the second week of December. Then he left. I waited until his truck was out of the driveway before I opened the tarp. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not rot, not blood, something chemical, faint, sitting behind the fur, like the way a garage smells after somebody spills antifreeze and doesn't quite clean it up. Then I looked at the body. There was no bullet wound. That was the first thing. On a hunted wolf, you can usually find the entry inside of 30 seconds, even if the hunter did a clean job through the ribs. I checked the chest cavity, the neck, the head, nothing. No exit, no entry, no powder burns in the fur. What I did find was a groove around the neck. Faint, but there. The fur was worn down to the guard hairs, and the skin underneath had the compressed look you get from a cable being pulled tight for hours. On the front left leg, above the ankle, another mark. Same pattern, same wear. And when I turned the paw over, 2 of the pads were split open, deep, in a way that only happens when an animal spends a long time trying to chew or twist itself free of something. Snares. Somebody had been snaring wolves, which is illegal for the general public in Montana, has been for years. You need a specific permit for wolf trapping, and even then, you can't use neck snares, and even then, you have to check them every day. This animal had not been checked every day. You could tell from the leg, you could tell from the pads. I sat down on the concrete floor of the shop with the tarp half open, and I looked at that wolf for probably 15 minutes. She was maybe 4 years old. Her belly still had the shape you get from having pups the previous spring. I don't know why that detail hit me. I've worked on hundreds of animals, but I sat there on the floor and I felt something turn over in my chest. I finished the intake, wrote it up in the log, put her in the walk-in. Then I picked up the phone and I called Curtis. He came out the next morning with another officer I didn't know. A woman named Devin, badge on her belt, hair pulled back. They spent about 2 hours in the shop. They photographed the neck. They photographed the leg. They took swabs. Devin asked me a lot of questions about Ray, more than I could answer. What kind of truck? What direction he came from? Did he ever mention a property, a road, a town? I gave them what I had, which wasn't much. The phone number that didn't work. A first name, a description. Curtis asked me if I was willing to be a witness on record. I said yes. He said it might mean court. I said okay. They took the female with them in a cooler. Curtis shook my hand at the door and said, "You did the right thing calling." His voice was flat, not warm, not cold, just flat, like a man who'd made this same drive 100 times. The rest happened without me being in the room for most of it. I heard some of it from Curtis, some from a lawyer who called me in January, some from a piece in the Bozeman paper months later. Fish and Wildlife pulled Ray's license records. There weren't any. Not in his real name, which turned out not to be Ray. They opened a case on illegal trapping. They found a string of snare sets on state land north of the shop, up in the drainage past the old logging cut. Some of the sets had been out for weeks. There were bones near a couple of them, not just wolves. The second week of December came and went. Ray didn't show up. He didn't call. The number he'd used, the dead landline one, stayed dead. I finished the female mount for evidence storage, per Devin's request. I did a good job on her, better than I needed to. The shop is still open. I still do deer and elk and the occasional bear. A rancher out by Wilsall brought me a coyote in the spring, and I turned him down, which I've never done before, and I couldn't tell you exactly why. Sometimes a truck slows down on the county road out front, and I look up before I mean to. It's never the F250. It hasn't been the F250 in 3 years now. Whoever he was, he's somewhere else now, or he isn't anywhere at all. I still look up.